You might recall a case that happened within 3 months of the abortion legislation being passed in Ireland, and this happened when an unborn baby was misdiagnosed with trisomy 18 in the National Maternity Hospital. Now, at the time, the parents were told that the baby would not survive very long after birth, or if at all, and abortion was carried out, and that's what was, I presume, suggested, and their baby boy was 16 weeks gestation. Now, after the final results of the test came back, it basically showed that their little boy, who they called Christopher, was found to be perfectly healthy, but of course it was too late. Now, in the last week or so, it's also come to light that the state is being sued for 2 more cases that sound quite similar. We don't know much of the detail yet, but again, a case of misdiagnosis of a life-limiting condition, and then where abortion has happened. On the line to tell us a little bit more about this, and indeed the huge increase in the numbers of abortions taking place in Ireland, we've Niamh Uí Bhriain from the Life Institute. Niamh, maybe just start off with, in terms of the 2018 legislation, what does it allow for in terms of if there is a diagnosis of what's called, a fetal anomaly or a life-limiting condition?
Yeah, so the legislation allows for abortion right up to birth if the baby has a condition, according to the legislation, where a medical practitioner believes that the baby would not live longer than 28 days after birth. And this law, I suppose, is particularly aimed at babies who have conditions like trisomy 13, trisomy 18 or anencephaly. And in fact, we can see from the figures released from the British Department of Health that now the number of women travelling to abort for those reasons has gone down dramatically. So, in fact, babies diagnosed with those conditions are now being aborted in large numbers comparatively in Ireland. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is that very often, of course, these are late-term abortions because the diagnosis is made after the 20-week scan. And, of course, we've had these very distressing accounts written up in British Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology from research in UCC, which found that doctors were hugely distressed at having to perform these late-term abortions described as feticide. One of them described it as stabbing the baby in the heart. And we were told, and I think a lot of your listeners will remember, Wendy, back in 2018 during the referendum campaign, that the worst fears of pro-lifers would not be realised because you had parents in wonderful organisations like Every Life Counts who help people carry their babies and pour a lifetime of love into that short life when they've got a diagnosis like this. They wanted to warn Simon Harris, and they asked him repeatedly for a meeting saying mistakes will be made. If you're going to change the culture and always offer abortion as a default option, if parents feel that abortion is being pushed on them, you're going to see terrible mistakes being made. And as you said, within 3 months of the legislation being passed, we now know that little baby boy, Christopher, was aborted, and his parents really were told that there was no hope, which isn't true, and they felt they were pushed into an abortion. And we know about that case because the parents sued the hospital and are now looking for an inquiry into why it happened in the first instance, and they say that the government is dragging its heels on that inquiry. But now we have learned that was not the only mistake. We have learned, thanks to information released to Padder Tobin, that the state is currently being sued in two more ongoing cases in relation to a wrongful diagnosis under the Abortion Act. And I mean, sometimes I think, Wendy, in relation to abortion, is often such a kind of a sad and heartbreaking subject that sometimes you can't feel you can be shocked anymore. But this was a bombshell, and if the media was doing its job in this country, it would be the front page of every newspaper. That there are 3 cases, and in 4 short years, where a baby was misdiagnosed and aborted. And
this is just obviously where cases have been taken. Yeah. Obviously, we don't know the situation. I mean, I know through Every Life Counts and speaking to other families over the years, the number of times I've spoken to families who were told that X, Y, or Z was wrong, only to find out that, and many who continued with the pregnancy to then realise that actually the diagnosis was wrong. And of course, then you might have a whole host of people who get an early nuchal test where they're told that you've this percentage chance of the baby having that, and they would never know, if that diagnosis was correct or not.
Exactly. And it was only actually in the baby Christopher case, some of the really disturbing revelations that came out were only really because the parents pushed and pushed that they understood then that the baby was in fact perfectly healthy. And they raised this issue, which I think we have to talk about. And clearly these two cases should promote like a widespread debate on this issue. But you can see that there is this veil of secrecy being drawn both by the government and by most of the media, except for your good selves and a few others, around this whole area. As to has the culture dramatically changed in Irish maternity hospitals? And we're hearing anecdotal evidence, and now this kind of evidence that it has. Where there's
so what do you mean by that? That abortion is the expectation rather than it being presented as an option?
Exactly, that is particularly where the baby is believed to have a life-limiting condition, that abortion is the expectation. Like in the case of baby Christopher, the parents were told things that are frankly not true. They were told there was no hope for the baby, that the baby wouldn't live after birth, when we know actually in relation to trisomy 13 and 18 and even anencephaly, that very often baby does live beyond birth, even for a short period. But that, between 10 and 20% of children with trisomy 18 and 13 can often live up to a year or more. So I think parents are not getting the real facts, that the culture now is seeing abortion as a default option, and we are seeing these appalling, dreadful mistakes being made, and that no inquiry is going into what's happening in our hospitals. And we're seeing this, Wendy, at the same time that Stephen Donnelly goes on radio and tells RTE that 8,500 women availed of abortion services. They were his words. Last year. Now, if he's correct, and I've sent in 2 press queries into Stephen Donnelly's office and they have not responded, if he is correct, that is an enormous jump, even from the previous year, 2021, because we're already seeing this huge jump between the number of abortions in Ireland, or the number of women travelling for abortions in Ireland, and then the number of abortions that actually took place in Ireland between 2018 and 2019. But if we're looking at 8,500 abortions in 2022, that's another huge jump of 25% on 2021. And again, it speaks to this question. We were told in the referendum that abortion was going to be safe, legal and rare, and it's anything but, and the situation seems to be getting worse.
Sadly.
And the question is, of course, if the abortion review was worth anything, this is precisely what it would be looking at. What are these horrendous mistakes that are being made? Are people being pushed towards abortion? Are women in crisis are they being counselled at all? Like, I think an investigation by Students for Life highlighted that they weren't, that simply are just told, here's where you can get an abortion. That we've dramatically gone in the wrong direction towards protecting women, towards protecting babies, and the country needs to wake up and have a serious look at the horrible outcomes of the Abortion Act.
That was Niamh Uí Bhriain there of the Life Institute, just talking to us about some of the outcomes of abortion legislation in this country.